All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to be looking at the very beginning of industrialization. Now, this again is after the Civil War and right when the Reconstruction's really started kicked off and things are starting to move down the country. Um, and I've told you before how the North was really focused on industry and factories, things like that. So this picture shows is a really good picture to show how it looked like. The factory here, factory there, and look at the air. You know, imagine breathing that in. And it's nowhere near like what we have now. Now we have regulations, things like that. Back then they didn't have that stuff. So yeah, you could just imagine breathing in a bunch of like smoke and coal and stuff like that. So the objective today, we're going to analyze what the Industrial Revolution was like for the US, or examine the importance of obtaining new and fresh raw materials. Raw materials are things like wood, minerals from the ground, fresh water, things like that. And then we're going to create an argument on why immigrants would be coming over to the US. Okay. All right, so here's your warm up. This one has three questions to it. The first one asks you to describe in detail, which means I want descriptions like, don't just say they look poor. In detail, describe the people coming onto the boat. All right, specifically the women. Now, let me move the little timer and let me move my little camera over here. So, again, specifically look at the women. That should really show you to do a contrast between the guys and the girls. What do you notice? There's really two big things between the guys and the girls. So again, describe them. How do they look? What are they carrying? Things like that. The second question asks you, how are the two signs basically encouraging people to come to the U.S.? All right, because there's two signs. One on the port, which is a big one that says like no oppressive taxes. There's that one right there. And then there's one, if you look on the side where Uncle Sam is, there's another sign right there. It says like free education, free land, free speech, free ballot, free lunch. So the question is again, how are they um, like encouraging people to come to the U.S.? And the last question asks you to look at the background, right? Specifically, look at the clouds, okay? From where Uncle Sam is to the other side, what do you notice? Okay? And if you look at the clouds, there's something there. What is it? What does it look like to you, and what is it trying to do? What is it doing? Okay? So go ahead, pause the video because we're moving on in three, two, one. All right, so here's the thing. The first industrial revolution actually occurred not in the US, but actually occurred in England. And it changed their whole industry, their whole economy, basically overnight as time went on. More and more machines were used. Now, it didn't really hit full effect in Americas for another like 50 years. Okay, yeah, there was some machinery, a little bit here or there, you know, but it didn't really take effect for another like 50 years. Now, the second industrial revolution was really due to the Civil War and the Reconstruction era. You know, after the fighting's done, we're rebuilding. Then it becomes like, well, you know what? Now that we're rebuilding, let's really rebuild. Let's make things better, faster, stuff like that. Before the Civil War, the country had about 30 million people, and only 1.3 million of them actually worked in some factory, some form. A lot of the jobs that people had were, majority of them were farmers. People were store owners, um, Yeah, there was lawyers, of course, and things like that. Um, but there wasn't many factory workers because again, there wasn't that much factories. Um, but it wasn't until the Civil War really happened and once it passed that people really decided, you know what, I don't want to go back to that life. I don't want to be a farmer. You know, that was my dad's thing, or my other brothers can do that. I'm going to do something else. I want to do something other than being a farmer. And so some people decided, you know what, there's, you know, um, copper and stuff like that in the mine, in the mountains out west. I'll go out there. Some people were like, you know what, I'd hop on the railroad. They're always hiring, so I'll just go there. I get to see the country, things like that. So some people did the railroad. And then some people decide, you know what? I'm going to go up north where the factories are. There's going to be jobs. I'll go there. Okay. Now, if you look at this picture right here, this is a great illustration of how factories were back then. Now, if you notice on the top level, there's like a walk beam area and there's like little windows that they had to have open because those machines generated a lot of heat. And as you guys know from basic science, heat rises. So if they didn't let that hot air out, those people will be cooking. So it's imperative that they open those windows up so that the air can get out, fresh air can come in, you know, things like that. All right, so the GNP, which stands for Gross National Product, it grew 8 times larger than it did when at the end of the Civil War. The economy was basically booming. We're making things, stuff like that. Um, However, in the East Coast, raw material was needed. So they looked out to the west where there was an abundance of it. There was a bunch of, fresh water. There was a bunch of timber, wood. There's a lot of coal, iron, copper, things like that. So they're like, you know what? Let's just have people chop down trees over there, go mining over there, and bring that stuff back to the East Coast, you know. So again, remember the railroads at this time did not connect just yet, but they did go a certain distance. So the railroads would go out west carrying passengers, who wanted to see the west, and people who were looking for work. And on the way back, the train would take the lumber, coal, copper, whatever they needed. Um, and trains were seen more effective. To take one big tree back on a carriage, if the carriage wheel busted, well, that's it. That thing is heavy, and there's no way you can take it off, put it back on, well, and fix the wheel and all that stuff. You're not gonna do that. But trains, they just went. They can carry a heavy load, multiple heavy loads, and keep trucking. Now, one of the biggest things in demand was this thing on the bottom, this bottom picture. That's petroleum. Um, it was needed to make kerosene. Now, you may not have heard of what kerosene is. Kerosene is used to light up lanterns and stoves, stuff like that. It's a fuel. Now, I'm sure you looked at that and said, I don't know about petroleum, but that looks like oil. If you thought that, you're on the right track because that's basically what it is. Petroleum is another word for like oil. It's a byproduct of it. Same thing with kerosene, gasoline, things like that. Um, so oil is already in a high demand in our country back then. All right, so here's your first question. So we have been using petroleum, oil since 1859. Yeah, it's been a long time. So here's my question. Why do you think we haven't found an alternate source for it yet? I mean, it's been around for a long, long time. You know, uh, why haven't we found another source? Why haven't we found something else instead of oil? What do you think? What do you think? Why haven't we found another source, an alternate source to oil? Okay, so take a minute, think about it, right? And put your response, right? But we're moving on in three, two, one. So the population in the United States actually tripled from 1860 to 1910. Now, when more people come to an area, the demand for items such as fresh water, food, things like that, it's going to increase as well. And that's what happened with the population increase. Now, the population increased for a couple of reasons. Mainly, one was large families. Yeah, it was not that uncommon to have a family of like 12 kids, 8 kids, things like that. That was pretty common, you know. Nowadays, when someone has like 12 kids, it's like, wow, man, what you guys trying to start a basketball team? 5-on-5 and two in reserves, or what? You know. But the other one is the flood of immigrants, not only coming from Europe but also Asia. Okay, now later on in this unit, we'll be talking about the Asians coming over. A lot of focus is on Europeans coming to the East Coast, but me primarily, I want to focus on the Asians coming over because you don't really hear much about them. You see movies about the European immigrants, Italians and English and French and people like that, mainly Italians, but um, you hear about their stories. You don't really hear about our side over here. So we're going to be talking about them later. So just keep that in the back of your head. Okay. But a lot of immigrants left their nation, left their homes, basically just dropped stuff and took what they could carry, their essential things, and left. Um, the number varies, I've seen so many different numbers, but it's about like 20 million or so people came over. Um, but just imagine these people, just various reasons, you know, um, war, foods, not enough food over in their other country. Um, you know, they just want to get away. There may be trouble. They might have gotten in trouble. Um, stuff like that. Being persecuted. So people came for various reasons. But the thing is, these boat rides were not like how they are now, where you could just get on the boat and boom, there you are in a matter of days, um, or weeks or whatever it is. These ships took a while, took some months to go across. Um, and the thing is, a lot of people saw these immigrants coming in like, oh my God, they're bringing crime, they're bringing this and that, and they're going to be taking. Whereas industry owners, factory owners, they loved it when immigrants come over. They love it, especially back then. Because mainly what they do is they tell the workers, hey, Ted, you're a good guy, but we got some people who would say they can work for like $3. I'm paying you $5. Um, could you go down to 3? I want to keep you, but this guy will work for less. So if the guy says yes, hey, cool. Let's rewrite your contract saying you're only going to work for 3. As time goes on, they'll do it again. Hey, this guy said he'll work for $2. Can you go to $2? And that's what they do. Because remember, back then they didn't have a minimum wage, so there was no you have to pay these people. This is the lowest you could pay them. They didn't have them back then, and they would use that fear tactic of, oh, these immigrants are coming, they're gonna take your job, so unless you go pay, you take a lesser pay, you're gonna lose your job, so they use that against them. And while the workers was hurting, the factory owner people, CEO people, the top manager people, they were raking in the dough. All right. So this question, basically, I'm asking you, what do you predict is going to be the biggest challenge that the United States will face? Because in this unit, all these things are going to happen, and I want you to basically tell me which one you think is going to be the biggest problem, biggest challenge that the United States will go through during the industrialization time. Is it going to be crowded cities? Racism, favoritism to a particular race, or social status, which means like the more money you have, that type of stuff. Do you think corruption in politics? I think that's going to be a big problem. Corporations using influx of immigrants to take to their advantage. So again, just like I said earlier, with the immigrants coming in, they're basically telling people, well, can you work at this lower pay? Because there's people coming in, they want jobs, and they'll work for cheaper. So you think corporations using that's going to cause a problem? Um, Corporations becoming too powerful. Ooh. Do you think that's going to be the biggest challenge? Or do you think removing more natural resources than truly needed? Do you think that's going to be our biggest challenge? Okay. So what you're basically doing is you're going to be listing them, but if you look at the writing prompt on the bottom, that's what you're going to be doing. I believe that the biggest challenge the US will face is, what is it? Is it racism, crowded cities, politics, the corporation becoming too powerful? Which one do you think is going to be the biggest problem? And I want you to tell me, why did you pick that one as the that you think is going to be the biggest problem? So why did you pick that one? Why did you think that one's going to be the biggest problem the US is going to face? After that, after you give that first one, you pick that first one, the biggest problem, biggest challenge, and you give it explanations, the other ones, the second biggest problem, third biggest problem that you believe, after that, you can just list them. Okay, so instead of saying the second biggest challenge will be crowded cities, because I don't want to hear it because. You don't have to write it because. Okay, just move on to the next one. What's your third biggest one? What's your fourth biggest one? What's your fifth biggest one? And which one is the least biggest one to you? Okay, now remember, we're talking about in the 1880s, not now, because some students in the classroom, they started writing, well, corrupt politics, like so and so, and they start naming politicians. Now, I'm not asking about now, I'm talking about back then. Okay, you don't know what's happened back then. That's what I'm telling you, use the words predict. Which one do you think is going to be the biggest problem, the biggest challenge? Okay, so hopefully you're watching this video and actually listening to this point. Okay, so if you are listening and you are watching, pause the video so you can write your thing, create the list on a piece of paper. Okay, help you out. But we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right, so this is one thing I had you guys do in class where I put the link up in the chat box and you had to click it. But for you guys, since you were not in class and you can't get the link, you're basically going to have to go to YouTube and, well, basically type that up in the URL, and it should take you to something called like the coal company town. It's like a 2 minute and 30 like 7-second video. Excuse me. Um, so watch that video, pretty short, and write a paragraph on what the video was about. Now here's the thing. If you only write 1 or 2 or 3 sentences, you're not going to get credit for it. Because I'm really trying to get you guys to write paragraphs. A paragraph is not 2 sentences. That is not a paragraph. Okay? So if you feel like, oh, I'm just going to write 2 sentences and that's all you're going to get, well, then you're not getting your points. It's simple as that. It's as simple as that. So watch the video. If you have to watch it multiple times, watch it multiple times. What was it about? put some facts in there that they mention. If you even need a sentence where you're like describing what the pictures they show, how the people look like, the town, things like that, fine, do that. But it has to be, 4 to 5 sentences. Okay. So pause the video, go to that YouTube video, watch it, and then come back and unpause this because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. So now we've come to the exit ticket. So here's your first question. Why would it be important for the East Coast to get fresh raw materials from the West Coast? So explain your reasoning. Okay, so think about it. Where was our country first created? East Coast, right? Now think about that time when the pilgrims and all those people, the Revolutionary War, you know, our country is now 13 colonies, but now it's a nation, things like that. All that time, what happened to those resources in the East Coast? What happened to all the trees, the copper, the coal, all that stuff? So why would it be important for the East Coast people to get raw material from the West Coast? What happened to theirs? Okay, so think about that. The second question says, what are some possible reasons why some immigrants would be coming over to the US? Okay, so think about it. Why would they come? I mentioned a couple reasons earlier in the video. So if you want to go back and hear those, by all means, go back and do that. But think, why would people just leave their homes, leave where they grew up and come on a boat only with what they could carry and their essential things and come to the United States? Why would people do that? Okay, so once you've answered the exit ticket, you are done for the day. Okay, so hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed it. So that's it. You guys, you take care. You be safe. Okay.